But this to me is transitioning into what we have experienced this past week in our world, in terms of systemic racism. And I just feel like that we have to talk about this. Yes, the virus is on our radar, and what's happening to our brothers and sisters of color. We have to speak to this. And so I just wanted to hear your thoughts this morning about what is ours to do as Unity Truth students to be a light and to hold what's happening right now. So what are your thoughts on that?
I spoke about this in my service for Unity on the River this morning. Go check out Unity on the River on YouTube. And one of the things I mentioned, I'm doing a series on the book When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chedron. I always say her name wrong. Pema Chedron. Anyways, it's a powerful book. The subtitle is Heart Advice for Difficult Times, which we are all going through right now with the pandemic, even more so now with this week. And we see cities on fire. And I reminded people that what we are seeing is the result almost of 400 years of a consciousness of othering. Slavery started in the United States 1619. So we just observed 400 years of allowing a virus, racism, to be embedded in how this country runs, the political system, the economic system, all systems. And even though there's been definitely an awareness of this and efforts to change it, we got to realize those efforts really started with any sort of urgency only like in the last, 50, 60 years of the 400, right? So the turnaround is slow. And what we've seen is continuation of the other end, this separation, us versus them. And when people are asking, like, why are the riots going on? Why are people doing what they're doing? Martin Luther King Jr. said it best: riots are the language of the unheard. For 400 years, there's been a group of people who have been unheard. And Will Smith also said a great thing. He said, racism isn't getting worse, it's just getting filmed right now. And, much of white America is shocked to see what's going on, whereas the America of people of color are like, this is just Tuesday for us. Can you understand why we are upset? Can you understand why we are being as angry as we are? And make no mistake, this is not just a racial thing. This has been a gender thing as well. This has been a sexual orientation thing as well. There's always been the other end. And that stems from, once again, us not realizing the oneness that we have as expressions of the divine, and also allowing fear to take control of us. When we don't understand another, we fear the other. Then when we fear the other, we resent the other. Then we become angry with the other. Then we seek violence against the other. And for me, that's at the heart of it. And also for me, the change isn't gonna come from us people of color. Like we've been the recipients of both the overt and the subtle and hidden racism that continues to be present in governmental policies at local and federal levels. So it's not up to us to change it. It's up to us to let people see it, and to invite people into realizing that we are human too. Can you treat us humanely in every day-to-day experience? In Unity and other New Thought traditions, then the question comes out, like, what do we do about this, right? Because We are peace loving hippies. We're not going out there throwing rocks at people. We're not going out there burning and looting, nor should we. I don't advocate for violent rioting. I always advocate peaceful protests. And I talked about this a lot in to plug another thing I do, a podcast I recently started called the Evolving Enneagram. The idea is, when it comes to spiritual activism, our first response is to make room for the discomfort that we feel. Allow it to percolate in us. Ask ourselves a deeper question. Why does this make me feel uncomfortable? And then, in what ways may I have contributed to it? And then, truly from that place of heart-centered contemplation, now what's mine to do about it? And there are many ways we can do things about this. Maybe yours is to go walk in a peaceful protest. Maybe yours is to write your congressman, write your senator. Maybe yours is to find an organization that is doing active work around this, like Black Lives Matter, and make a donation or volunteer your time. There's so many ways that we can all be in action that comes from that grounded contemplative place. So those are my thoughts around that.
Thank you, Ogun.
At times I struggle with the conversation because I know I'm going to irritate someone.
Bring it, girl, bring it.
I know. And so the first thing when I thought about, there was a discussion in a Facebook group about, if you're preaching tomorrow, what would you say? And what I feel most strongly about is that I don't want to see your white fragility. I don't want to see you asking for forgiveness. I don't want you to be asking, to say I'm sorry and looking for forgiveness. And it's not that those things aren't part of a healing journey, but as a white person, my role is is restoration, is reparation, is owning my whiteness, owning that I am white, that I am part of a system that is oppressive, that I am part of a system that is a racist system. I benefit. White privilege is the system to which I was born into it. I didn't create it. But when I say I need to claim my whiteness, that means I need to use, white is not racialized the way people of other colors are. White is just is. It just it's not race. It means I don't ever have to think about it. I never have to think about being white. I know I can go into any grocery store or drugstore anywhere in the world and find shampoo that will work for my hair. I mean, just as simple as that. That's white privilege. I don't have to think about what's available to me. And that's, in the scheme of racism, that's like a little thing, but it gets people thinking. So if I was preaching this morning, like had a whole, all by myself, I probably would have started out with, hey, guess what? This is how I was racist today. And I know that people will go like, oh, no, I'm not a racist. I'm like, if you're white, it's in there because you carry unconscious bias. You carry unconscious operating system that perpetuates white privilege. Do you do it on purpose? Do you do it because you don't care? Do you do it because you don't love people? Do you do it because you don't believe in oneness? Do you do it because, no, you do it because it was instilled before you were even born, to look at a system that is a differential, to born into a system that has a power over, that I benefit from. So my job is not to ask for your forgiveness, not to say I'm sorry, not to show my fragility, not to be so afraid of saying something because I might do it wrong, but being willing to do it wrong and get called out on it. To get called out on, what you just said was, a little, did you hear what you just said? Did you notice how you ignored the the racist store clerk in front of you. You know, did my job in this is, and I agree with Ogun 100% about, you know, the quote that violence isn't necessarily part of a riot, but I think we need a little bit of a riot in terms of shaking up white privilege. And the toughest thing that I bump up against is that white fragility, is that when I see people, well, we just have to see it right, or we just teach truth principles, or we just love each other. If somebody says to me, you know, all lives matter, or I'm colorblind and I don't see color, or we just need to love one another, I get a riot going on inside me, because what I've just done is marginalized anyone who's a different color than I am. I honestly believe that like Ogun said, what we're seeing is 400 years of I'm done. Like I'm done. And it's 400 years overdue. And I'm very happy to support you in being done, like as an ally to being done. I'm not going to do it violently, but I'm going to irritate somebody's consciousness. I'm going to irritate someone's thinking. I'm going to point out where your privilege is. I'm going to point out that where some of your activities are racist. I'm going to point out where you need to interrupt white privilege. I'm going to point out where you can be making a difference. If you're not uncomfortable with this conversation, then we're not doing our job. If you're not uncomfortable with stepping out and taking an action, like very simply, look at the books at your church, in your home, look at the books on your bookshelves. How many authors are people of color? If there aren't any, guess what? It's just an unconscious bias. It's not meant to guilt or shame. It's to wake us up. There are many ways to make restitution, to make reparation. Ogun mentioned a few of them. To write your congressman, write your senator. For some people, it might be go to a protest. For other people, go educate yourself. Just go learn. Look at where you shop. You know, do you shop are any of the places where you go grocery shopping or restaurants you go to, are they owned by people of color? You know, where you bank, where do you give your money? What organizations do you give your money to? I mean, there's a never-ending supply of ways to make restitution and reparation. And that's where I think, as a white person, that's where my energy is. I'm a white anti-racist. I recognize there's a system in place called white privilege that I benefit from, but my work every day is to uncover how I keep that system in place, and how do I deconstruct it. It has to be white people deconstructing it. Otherwise, it just gets, there's lots of people that go, oh, there's that angry black woman again, or oh, there's that angry black man again. We created it. We have to deconstruct it.
And let's not forget the most powerful tool we all have, which is the ability to go vote.
Yes.
And I don't mean just at the presidential election every 4 years. Get in touch with what's happening in your local community, because it starts there. What are the policies in place around your public schools, for example? One of the most subtle and not realized forms of systemic racism is, creating school budgets based on property taxes. Yeah, I mean, think about that, right? So, of course, poor neighborhoods are going to have less money to keep putting into schools and education because of another fascinating, subtle form of racism, white flight. Whenever the neighborhood gets bad, white people they flee, and they're already assuming it's going to be bad because people of color moved in. And we get this happening all the time, and we kind of don't see it really, so we don't think about it. So we don't think local elections matter or that important. And you know what? I'm guilty of it too. This is not accusation, this is confession. I'm guilty of it too, because for many of us people of color, there's just this sense of despair and hopelessness. How are we going to turn around this ship that's been traveling in one direction for 400 years, sort of deal. So it's challenging for us not to respond with anger and violence all the time, like you're seeing on TV. It's frustrating to since the last time and the time before that, someone of color was killed at the hand of law enforcement, and questions were raised and promises to do better, and then it doesn't happen. So it's a frustration. It's an anguish, and the spiritual tools are there for us to kind of help. I don't know, respond, not react. And we're gonna have our feelings in the whole news around George Floyd. And this is the last thing I'll say about this. I only heard or realized, I may have missed it before, that he was 46 years old. 46 years old. I turn 46 tomorrow. This is not a birthday plug. I turn 46 tomorrow. And it hit home again on a whole new level, the insanity of where we are at with this, that someone my age, I can't imagine it, that 46 years old. And to Kelly's point about privilege, you've seen it on TV many times before, where people of color, parents of color, have to have a whole different conversation with their kids around how to be in the world.
Yeah.
And it's a conversation that is rooted in fear for their lives. And it shouldn't be this way. So what is ours to do to be that presence of love? The Fillmore spoke of love as the great harmonizer. So how do we bring harmony? How do we bring a sense of peace? How do we bring a sense of eliminating this virus of racism? And it starts, to Kelly's point, with each of us really doing that job of being mindful and observant our words, our thoughts, and our actions, both the obvious ones, but more importantly, the subtle ones. And mindfulness, that's the ultimate spiritual practice, in my opinion. It's mindfulness, both on the cushion with meditation and off the cushion in our everyday lives, moments, and interactions.
It's when the racism is invisible is when it's at its worst. So my practice, my contemplative practice of being mindful, and when you said, Sheryl, at the beginning about a foundation for unity is prayer, when that's a contemplative practice is my starting point, it expands my capacity to be aware and informs the action I need to take. And I have to take action where I'm uncomfortable. It just has to, otherwise it doesn't change.
Well, the last thing I will say, that's kind of my mantra, is we got to keep going deeper with this. We have to look within and ask ourselves as white people, where am I complicit?
Mm-hmm.
Where, and it's uncomfortable. But I think that we have to do our inner work on this. And I found a quote by Charles Fillmore in the 12 Powers, which I thought was really powerful. He said, "The beliefs that you and your ancestors have held in mind have become thought currents so strong that their course in you can be changed only by your resolute decision to entertain them no longer. They will not be turned out unless the ego, through whose domain they run, decides positively to adopt means of casting them out of consciousness, and at the same time erect gates that will prevent their inflow from external sources." I just thought, that's it right there. I grew up in the segregated South, and I've done a lot of introspection, a lot of healing work, a lot of work, and I'm doing more work. I feel like that's my job. If I'm going to move this conversation forward as a white person, like Kelly was saying, I know that I benefit. There is privilege to being white.